That point when they found me, I was already way into the process of drowning. I was like maybe half of the time with my head under the water and half still over the water. I had stopped calling or waving a long time ago and was really just trying to survive. And yeah, I don't know if I had made it, would have made it for another maybe like 10 minutes.
Right, so I have the wonderful Robin Staps of the Ocean, or the Ocean Collective, I should say, with me. How are you, my friend?
Very good, very good. Thanks for the invite.
It's a pleasure, man. You must be probably, I think, the busiest person on the planet at the moment, with pretty much self-releasing an album, running a record label all at the same time, and being in the band. How do you do it?
Yeah, good question. I'm always busy, but at least I'm not on tour right now, so that kind of helps, you know. It's difficult catching up with everything while touring and then doing all the label work on the side. And then if it was album PR on top of that, it would probably be too much by now. So I'm happy to be home for a while and have some time to put into that. So that's good.
Absolutely, man. I was gonna say, because this is the first Ocean release, which is completely just yourselves. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That is correct. Yeah, it's the first release solely on Pelagic, digital and physical, all formats. Yeah, we've released the last couple of records with Metal Blade, and that was always a good experience working with those guys. But we just felt like we got to the point now where we can do it ourselves.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I mean, you're a glutton for punishment for for the amount of work that you've gotten yourself into, man. What kind of made you want to have kind of like delve a little bit more into the Holocene era that was tackled, like I think it was the final track on Phanerozoic 2, is that right?
Yeah, that happened kind of like in an intuitive and unplanned way. Like Peter just started sending me ideas in mid 2020 that I felt inspired by, and I started doing things with them, and adding guitars and drums and sending it. We were sending it back and forth for a while without really knowing where this would lead us to. And then after a while, there was a record, and it felt like an Ocean record. At first, we weren't actually 100% sure, but in the end, it did very much feel like an Ocean record. And so, and also like it felt like it kind of connected with where Holocene or Phanerozoic 2, the second half of that record, left off. It kind of made sense reconnecting with that also conceptually. And it's an interesting period, obviously, because it's kind of like also synonymous for the modern age, and it allowed a lot of different topics basically to deal with. And it also made sense conceptually. The Holocene is further subdivided into the climatic ages, which we used as song titles here. So it kind of like, continued along the conceptual idea of the Phanerozoic records. And this is where we saw this record, like a kind of like an appendix to Phanerozoic in a way, something that we hadn't really planned from the beginning, but that just happened. And now that it did, we were quite stoked about releasing it as part of the Phanerozoic like kind of like album trilogy, if you want. So
because yeah, you're right, it does kind of tackle, I think, critical thought is well, that's one of the bits that stood out, from Loic repeating it a lot. That was kind of one of the bits I really took away from it. But it's kind of about the human condition. Is that fair to say?
I guess you could say that. It's just a bunch of seemingly unrelated topics at first that all flared up during these 2 or 3 weird years that we are looking back at now, but that are in the end not as unrelated as they seem, because they're all topics of the modern age, or like all the songs are dealing with certain aspects of alienation and like weird things happening during the pandemic, and also more general observations, such as the rash degradation of knowledge and critical thinking, as thematized in the opening track in Preboreal, for example, going back to Guy Debord's book, The Society of the Spectacle, which he wrote in 1967, long time before the internet, and still it's almost feels like it was written for to analyze our YouTube and Instagram society of today, which is characterized by the image and the power of the image and representation rather than actual content and all these things. And I read that book during my studies and was intrigued by it back then. And now I felt like it's more up to date than ever in many ways, you know, and almost visionary, although the guy was obviously not talking about these things that it seems like he's talking about. So I found that very intriguing, along with the musical departure that this record also kind of represents, you know, going more electronic and exploring a lot of things in every aspect, from songwriting to instrumentation, that we haven't really done before. But yeah, we can talk about that later too. Instrumentation wise, there's lots of brass on the record, for example, and songwriting wise, it's the first record that, like I already said, was written initially by Peter. Like, I mean, most of the initial ideas were Peter playing synths, and then I added guitars and drums over them. So it's no longer been an album that I wrote sitting down at home, you know, always starting with a blank page, basically. So in many ways, this record is different and very modern, and at the same time postmodern and kind of like deconstructive in a way. So it made sense to also approach it lyrically from a similar angle and leave each song its own space to, you know, deal with a certain topic.
It's interesting you were mentioning about the musical output, is that I feel like of all the Ocean albums, this is probably the most kind of almost like you have a single track that happens. You know, it's just kind of a constant ebb and flow of different sort of dynamics, essentially.
Yeah, I think it feels like that for me as well. In a way, this is where it connects with Pelagial for me, because there was also a record that was written as one piece of music. Actually, Holocene was not written as one piece of music. Like I just said, it's all isolated tracks that somehow happened around the same time, you know, but they all were written as distinct individual tracks, while Pelagial was really written as like one piece of music, basically. But the end result is kind of similar in a way that you feel like everything is part of a greater whole. And it was really difficult to pick singles from Holocene because we felt like none of them was representative of the album.
I also feel like, you know, going back to sort of the themes and the topics, it feels very introspective, you know, like it sounds like it was kind of a pandemic record. I try not to kind of talk about the pandemic too much because obviously everyone's heard a lot about that and we're kind of coming out of that now, but it does feel like there was a lot of introspection, you know, into yourself or oneself, you know, whilst writing that as well.
I guess so. I mean, we all had a lot of time to think about everything that was happening around us and in our own lives, and so yeah, it is maybe a quite introspective record that was was written in isolation. You can clearly hear that also somehow. In a way, it's like we've always worked like that. You know, we've always written records in isolation. We've always traveled to Iceland to record drums. You know, for the Phanerozoic records, for example, or back to the north of Finland for Procambrian. So we've always liked to start making records in isolation, voluntary isolation. And now this time it was involuntary isolation, but it was something we were very much used to for being creative. You know, nothing that felt uncomfortable. Like on the contrary. And I'm not the person that can write on tour, for example, or even now when I'm home from tour, there's weeks when I don't touch my guitar. You know, I'm not like constantly playing or writing music. I get into the zone very sporadically, but then very deeply, and then I'm actually quite productive. There's actually a second record that was also written during the same time that we haven't recorded yet, but it's mostly written. And so once I'm in the zone, it's all going very, very quick.
Wow. Yeah, you guys are quite prolific. It's great.
Yeah, relatively. I mean, we're not King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard releasing like fucking 4 records a year, you know. I don't know how they're doing that. That's fucking crazy. It's quality shit as well. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
really,
yeah.
really blows my mind. No, for us, yeah, the writing is quick, but then everything else that comes after it just takes forever, unfortunately. And I don't know why that is, but just like artwork for this record was a process that um took well over a year, and like we completely discarded the initial drafts we had because we also wanted the artwork to be kind of like we wanted it to have the same feel as the record, in that it's still making some sort of reference to the Phanerozoic records, but at the same time making it clear that it's a departure and that it's like more modern and kind of like disengaged and connected at the same time, which was really challenging to realize, and like we went through so many different drafts and approaches until we found what we were looking for. So yeah, this type of stuff always takes very long for us. We're not very prolific there.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's very like, iconic as well. Like for example, the Phanerozoic 2 was, like I saw it getting tattooed on people and stuff like that. I could imagine this same sort of idea, but like you say, it's a lot more abstract, as it's just a different sort of thing altogether.
Yeah, it is. And at the same time, it's making reference to the iconic Phanerozoic 2 cover, we call it the collision motif, like the two colliding planets in the kind of like crescent moon shape. In that, it's also playing with like circular imagery, and also in a metaphorical way making reference to the eternal return topic that we've explored on the Phanerozoic records. So like that was something we wanted to make happen here, to show up these references without making it too obvious, and to still connect with the previous, but at the same time make it clear that this is kind of like a new beginning, or like a departure or a detour, or whatever you want it to be, and that was challenging, but I'm very happy with the outcome. And
absolutely, man. So going to the songwriting, as you mentioned, a lot of it kind of stemmed from Peter Voigtman, and was that kind of because it's probably a different experience completely to how the records are written normally, because it's normally you kind of singularly write it and then everyone kind of brings their bits in, right? Is that correct?
That's how it's been in the past, although with Phanerozoic 2, it was also already more of a collaborative effort. Like there are some tracks on Phanerozoic 2 that Paul wrote, for example, Oligocene or Holocene, the track, were songs that initially were written by Paul. So it's become more of a collaborative effort in recent years. But this record really was different for me in that all the initial song ideas were really written by Peter. So for me, it was like working with something that was already there, and that was really cool actually, because it actually worked out really well. Like I felt inspired by what he wrote, and I felt like I wanted to add things to it and like take these songs further, because most of them were only usually 2 parts, sometimes 3 parts, but not like fully developed, arranged songs. But the parts by themselves were pretty well thought out and well produced already. And this is what you can also hear when you listen to the SHRVL record. That's Peter's solo project, which is going to be a part of the box set. So we decided to release that parallel with our Holocene album, because I think it's well, first of all, it's a great musical work of its own that is beautiful, and secondly, it's interesting for those people who listen to the Holocene record and to see where it's all coming from. To go back to the ideas in their more original state, and see how they have developed into ocean songs. Most of Peter's tracks were with programmed drums or just beats, and mostly synthscapes and sounds and moogs, and then I added guitars, vocals, and the brass arrangements mostly over them. So they turned into quite huge pieces, and listening to the SHRVL record is in some way going back to the origins of these huge pieces. But there are also some completely different tracks that Peter wrote around the same time that were not used in any way on Holocene. So this is what I just said is not true for the whole SHRVL record, but for parts of it. And I think everyone who's into Holocene will find some interesting musical themes, and see them being explored in a different context and from a different angle when they listen to the SHRVL record.
Sure. And it's interesting, you mentioned about the brass. Like, I feel like almost the brass has become part of the ocean sound. You're just kind of like assimilating different different instruments as each album goes along.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense for me, and I've always loved brass, but I was somehow afraid to use it, and I think that was because I was prejudiced somehow, because I always thought of it. I don't know. I always had this big band kind of like feeling in mind, this kind of like euphoric big band feeling, which is certainly like one of the things you can express and achieve by using brass, but it's not by far not the only thing. You know, the darkness of especially the lower octave ranges of trombone and tuba, you know, there's like just an incredible richness and fatness and saturation of sound that fits very well with heavy music. And this is something I really discovered working on Holocene. And I actually very early made the decision to focus on that rather than have, again, an album where you have strings in one track and then like, you know, like some brass instruments in another track. And I really wanted to have a direction here, and that's why the decision was made relatively early that it's going to be brass. And so we didn't record any strings. There's no cellos, no violins or violas on this record, which we have used on previous Ocean records. It's all brass, and almost pretty much on every song actually. And so yes, it's become a very integral component of our sound in these days and age, and we will see if we hold on to that for future records. And yeah, of course, there's also the first thoughts flaring up. If you know we can manage to do that live, at least for special shows with a small ensemble, would be super nice. But yeah, we haven't really started thinking about the touring cycle for this record yet. We're taking a bit of a break now for the next couple of months, and we're going to be going out again in the fall, and then we will start thinking about all these things.
Wow. So what was it that kind of, made you so, I guess, fixated with electronics and having that as kind of like, one of the main focal points of the album?
Peter. You should ask Peter. No, I mean he's always been the one exploring with sounds and electronic sounds in this band, and the reason why we asked him to join the band in 2018, I think it was just before Pharaozoic 1 or 2017, was that we felt like he could really contribute something that resonates well within the realm of our sound. And so all of these parts are coming from him, and I think we all share a love for certain types of electronic music. Everyone in the band, we actually listen to a lot more electronic music than to metal when we're on tour. And we've spoken many times, for example, about Massive Attack Mezzanine. That album in all its heaviness and with this vibe of, someone described it as the slowly drifting iceberg under the surface. Like this is just something that is very heavy and somehow very fitting for the type of music that we do with the ocean. And this could actually be really interesting to make, or try to make something that picks up that vibe and takes it into the context of like what we normally do with the ocean, or with whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. It's a different kind of heavy as well, like I don't know, this Holocene one's really kind of made me kind of think a lot when I've been listening to it and stuff, which it always does when, the Ocean albums are playing. But I think maybe also because there's really small dynamics that kind of slowly but surely reveal themselves. The more and more you listen to it, it really kind of like demands your attention,
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot to discover. Like at a first glance, it seems like a rather minimal record, because some songs are quite thinly instrumented, it seems, but it's actually not entirely true. There's a lot brooding underneath the surface, and when you listen to it on headphones, I think there's a lot of things to discover. And I've always liked these records where that are clear in sound, and where you understand the primary musical ideas quickly, but where you always will go back and realize, oh, I hadn't heard this before, and like the more you listen to it, the more you discover. I think it's one of these records, hopefully, and this is what I've always found really, really intriguing, these type of records.
kind of lead off of that question real quick, well, that sort of comment, I thought the mix was absolutely amazing. And that is one of the things that really allows you to hear all these different things that are going on over time.
We knew from the beginning that we wanted this record to sound a bit different, not like entirely different, but like there were certain things that we found important. And this is also why we decided to choose someone else to mix it in the end. We wanted the record to have a huge organic sound somehow, but at the same time feel very fat, and with like a drum sound that is big and natural, and not as produced as it was maybe in the past, which suited those records very well. Like, not to discredit it, like we all still think that Pelagial and the Phanerozoic records that Jens Bogel mixed sound great for what they were, but we wanted to just like do something slightly different with this record. And then we started getting test mixes done by a bunch of different people that we felt were it would be interesting choices, and totally got led astray, or just like got lost in this, because nothing really sounded like we were hoping it would sound. And at one point, the more we tried, the worse it got somehow, and we just didn't feel like we were making any progress. And then in that stage, which already entailed a big deal of frustration for especially for Peter, I think. And that's where Carl Daniel came into play, and he delivered a test mix that it instantly convinced us, and it felt like, wow, why, like, so stupid. Why didn't we ask him in the beginning? It makes complete sense in a way. And yeah, I think it was a very challenging record to mix, because it involves a lot of contradictions sound-wise. We wanted it to be like super fat and warm and organic, but at the same time also like fat in a way that it's like overwhelming, which is kind of like the opposite of organic. And like very difficult to find the right balance between, like, to even just verbally describe what we wanted, was challenging. And so it had to be done by someone who understood it from the musical understanding, rather than trying to like describe with words something that is like really just sometimes best done by listening to something and saying like this or not like this,
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it was a difficult album to mix, I think, and I'm very grateful to Carl Daniel for investing the time and the extra hours into making it sound as good as it does now. And he really is the same type of perfectionist as we are, in a way. Like, he's the guy that when we have already approved a mix, will like send me a text at like 4:30 in the morning saying that he's going to tweak something that no one is ever going to hear, and like I love that, because this is the dedication you need to make a record really great.
Absolutely, man. So if, as long as you're kind of open to talking about this, obviously you had an experience in Puerto Rico. I was just wondering if you would be open to telling us more about that experience.
Oh, the day I nearly died.
No.
Yeah, well, what can I say? We were in Puerto Rico to play a show. Actually, it was after our US tour with Catatonia in December last year, in early December, actually. And we had a couple of days off before we had our first show ever in San Juan. And we spent one of these off days on a beautiful remote beach with no lifeguards and no one else nearby, shooting a music video for Subatlantic, which is going to be released in about, I think, next week, actually. Yeah, it's the fourth single.
Oh, okay.
And kind of the logical, or like it's kind of like the continuation of the Parabiosis clip. So we were shooting that video that day, and when we were done, the sun was about to set. I wanted to take a swim. I went into the water, and I instantly realized pretty much that as soon as the moment I had lost the foot under the ground under my feet, I realized there was such a strong current that like I had no chance of getting back to the shore. So I knew basically within 5 minutes of going into the water that I wouldn't get out without help. And Well, I have been in rip currents before in Australia. They're usually very local phenomena that pull you out towards the sea, and they're caused by like depressions in the sand where all the water that gets flushed in with the waves needs to come out again. And, it's like it moves out in these channels, and that's where the pull is really strong. And I also knew what you had to do. You should swim parallel to the coast to get out of it, and usually these things are only like 30-50 meters wide, so like you get out of them pretty quickly. But this was not like that. It was something else. Like it was just like the whole bay, and it was like a 10 kilometers wide bay. Was like the current was extremely strong, and so I waved at my band colleagues at the shore and told them to get help, but I couldn't really tell if they understood the situation because I was already like quite far out. And then it was getting dark, and I went through different stages of exhaustion and hope and losing hope over the course of the next almost 3 hours that I was in the water.
Wow.
Until fast forward, the Puerto Rico lifeguard saved my sorry ass and pulled me out into a boat. First, they came with a helicopter. They didn't find me, or so I thought. 3 times I was in the cone of light, but it was like moonless night, and the waves were really big out there by the reef, so it was very difficult to find me. But eventually, they spotted me with a helicopter, and then a small boat came, which was almost crashed at the reef where I was at by that point. And they pulled me into the boat and took me out. And I was basically fine. I had bruises all over my legs and feet because in the very last moment there was a monster wave that came and smashed me underwater, and the boat ended up on my back, and I was like hurled against the reef and the rocks, and so I had like cuts all over my knees and feet, but this was all mostly superficial. And I had at that point when they found me, I was already way into the process of drowning. I was like maybe half of the time with my head under the water and half still over the water. I had stopped calling or waving a long time ago and was really just trying to survive. And yeah, I don't know if I had would have made it for another maybe like 10 minutes would have still worked, but I was very exhausted by the time they found me. And in the end, everything ended well. I had minor cuts on my knees and legs and feet. I couldn't walk for the next 3 days, couldn't wear shoes properly, which was challenging because we had to play shows and travel to Mexico. But in the end, the reality of tour life came back pretty quickly, and I think that was a good thing. I was completely high on adrenaline for the next 3 nights. I was very exhausted, but I couldn't sleep, and nothing really helped. I smoked very good weed, and nothing really helped. Like I was just like so turned on, and that's why I decided to write it down as well. That same night that all of this happened, I couldn't sleep, and I felt like I have to write this down, like really like diary style for myself to be able to remember and to process it later, and I did that. And in the end, I also decided to publish that, which wasn't my intention in the beginning, but I felt like I had to get that off my chest somehow. And I think it was a good thing. And now I'm fine. I have reconciled with the ocean. I've always had a lot of respect for the sea, which has been part of my fascination for it ever since I was a boy, and I also, it's also not my first time nearly drowning. I also had an experience as a kid actually in a similar way. So it has taught me even more respect. And yeah, don't be stupid. The surfer rules, watch the ocean for 20 minutes before you go in, because this is the intervals when the big waves really come. But like it was really, you when you watch the video, you get an idea of it. It was the picture perfect tropical sunset scenery. Like I would have not expected there to be such a strong current in the water, and also obviously a lot of lucky circumstances, that like timing, the fact that it was already sunset, so I only had about like 45 more minutes of daylight until it was pitch black night. And the fact that there was not a lifeguard patrol beach, but like actually quite far away from anywhere where you could get help. So all of these odds were kind of like against me there.
Wow.
And that's why I'm very happy to be here now and to be able to talk about it. And to those guys from the Puerto Rico Coast Guard who really risked their lives to save mine. That boat could have gotten smashed, and they're normally not allowed to get that close to the rocks unless they're a crew of more people in the boat, but there were only 3 people in the boat, so they really did something out of protocol as well.
Wow.
And I know that they went out, it's a very common phenomenon in Puerto Rico on all of the North Coast. They went out in that week, it was already their 4th mission, and 2 times they didn't find the swimmers that they were looking for. So I was one of the lucky 50% that they actually found and saved.
Wow. Jesus. That, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, in a way, the fact that you're releasing that video is kind of, you know, your sort of triumph over that adversity. Do you kind of see it that way, or?
I when I saw that video now, because it was only just finished like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, like I couldn't help but like swallowing. Like when I saw the camera turn there was exactly the scene on that beach, you know, and where we were shooting that, where like literally 5 minutes after that scene was filmed, I went into the water and nearly died, and I couldn't help the sour feeling like rising up in me, you know. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is like you say, I'm still here, I'm still alive, and I think I learned my lesson from this. And sometimes things happen that we can't imagine and we have no control over, and this was just another example of that, you know. Like the as blunt as that sounds, like the sheer overwhelming power of nature and the sea, and the fact that it's not always how it looks like, you know. It was really like that picture perfect postcard scenery of a tropical beach. And I'm an experienced swimmer. I'm a certified rescue diver. I have done over 200 dives. Like I really have a relationship with the sea, you know, and still I totally underestimated that. And that really makes me feel dumb, I have to say.
Wow. Well, the most important thing is, like you said, you're here, you know, and you're about to
Yeah.
release, you know, a career-defining album. It's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Always my pleasure. Thank you for the invite.